Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for being here. My name is Mike Pero. I'm the superintendent. This is one of many forums that we've had to date. This is our last planned forum, and hopefully tonight we're able to share progress that we've made and directions that we're heading. We want to start certainly by understanding how emotional this topic is. We want to acknowledge from everyone that has a child at Mendon Center, or if you're here at Allen Creek or Jeff Road, that we do understand that this is something that is worrisome to different degrees for people. I'm hoping that tonight you'll be able to not only hear about our progress, but you'll get a sense of the work that we've been doing along the way. And ultimately you're going to see progress in the form of going from multiple options to narrowing down some of our considerations as of now. Your input is valued, and I hope for those of you that reached out, you understand that. Anyone that's called or emailed has received a reply. Anyone that's requested a meeting, we've met with. And anyone that's filled out a we're listening form, all of your comments have been shared with our committee. Just a reminder, this is the committee composition. We have different stakeholder groups from across the district to serve on the committee to assess and dialogue around all different options relative to the size of Mendon Center. As I look at this committee, one of the things I just want to reiterate again is that if you are not on this committee, your voice is heard by the committee. And so I just want to reiterate that anytime anyone has filled out a form or had a question, it's all been directed directly through our attendance boundary committee. These forms are available again tonight. What we're hoping is you'll hear our progress this evening, you'll have any additional questions that you have, and then we'll process them at our next attendance boundary committee meeting. This is what we've been doing to date. As far as meetings and forums and gatherings around this topic. Tonight we are getting close to the end, so we are hoping that after tonight we'll be able to take a handful of options, further process your feedback, meet as a committee, and then shortly after that I'm hoping that the committee will have a recommendation to me that I can then process with the Board of Education. So again, the challenge, simply put, Mendon Center is at the point now where we're worried about capacity. And it's very possible that as soon as next year, we could be out of classroom space for incoming Mendon Center students. At the same time, Allen Creek has declining enrollment, and Jeff Road Elementary has available space. Below, you can see the following guidelines that our committee has been charged with following. I just want to highlight some of them. They include that students must stay on the track that they're currently in. So the committee cannot make a recommendation where, if your child is supposed to go to Calkins Road, that they change and they go to Barker Road, for example. So whatever movement happens, it will be for their elementary, and then back on track for the middle and high school. We looked at transportation implications, proximity to school. We gave considerations to 5th grade students. We also asked the committee to do their best in looking at communities and neighborhoods, making sure we're not dividing or causing a division within a neighborhood and sending some to one school and others to a different school. And then we also asked the committee to come up with a recommendation that isn't abandoned, which means we don't want to have to come back to this topic in 5 years. So we're hoping that a recommendation will be significant enough to right size, if you will, the 5 elementary schools that we have. I think it's important during my forums that I've had with you, there's been a lot of questions, and on the We're Listening forums there's been questions surrounding the comparison of schools. So our program's the same, our special ed service is the same. What are we doing with our English language learners? What are we doing with students that need different support services? What are we doing with students that are gifted? And so what I thought I would do is just take a couple minutes to help illustrate the commonalities that we have across our elementary schools. They are all obviously of the highest quality. I would say that the Pittsford schools is of the highest quality, and the 5 elementary schools are certainly foundational to that. So part of the consistency when we look at supports that are in place. In special education, in all of our buildings, you'll see learning specialists, reading and math support, speech, and other related service providers across all of our buildings. We have full-time school counselors, and every single one of our buildings has 2 school nurses. We have behavior specialists available for all schools, and we have student services teachers to coordinate all students' needs and services. Relative to content, ELA, mathematics, art, music, PE, and library all follow a very similar pattern. Very much have worked towards, in the last 7 or 8 years, common best practices across all of our elementary schools, actually across all of our schools. Science, you'll see new next generation skills and common units. Social studies, you'll see a lot of project learning, a lot of inquiry, project-based learning. Health and counseling, you'll see lessons given by your school counselor and school nurse teachers all across the 5 schools. In the social emotional learning, I want to pause here for a second on this slide. Your children will be taken care of regardless of the school that they're in. And our schools are a lot more than academic. And I really wish there was a way to capture the environment in the classroom or in the halls for all of you. And I know it's a leap of faith or trust, or my word, or the committee members' words, but I can share with you that our 5 schools dearly care about you and your children and their experiences. So you'll see a focus on diversity and inclusion across all 5 of our elementary schools. All 5 of our elementary schools practice restorative circles, morning meetings, and closing circles, and PLCs, which means the grade level teachers all get together, meet, plan, regroup if needed, students, and do the best that they can together to meet the needs of every child at their grade level. That's across all of our schools. Curriculum and assessment's the same. Wherever you go, you're going to see the same curriculum. That's a beauty. Actually, I now need to thank Melanie, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, with that work. Common assessments, common units, common lessons, best lessons are across the board. We believe in that balanced approach at all 5 of our schools. Our administrators are amazing. Our teachers are phenomenal. Our support staff's incredible. We find that balance between academics and social emotional learning. We believe in continuous improvement, not only for all of our kids, but for us. All of our buildings hold each other accountable. In our climate and culture, I'm extremely proud of, and I know you would be, regardless of where your son or daughter may attend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cimmerer, and he's going to take you through where we were, and then where we are now, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And actually, before I do turn it over to Dr. Cimmerer, committee members, if you could raise your hand that are here tonight. I want to give a huge thank you to all of you for the time. There's a lot going on in the world right now and in New York State, and a lot of added stress. And they have been open-minded, they've been diligent, they've tested each other's thinking, they've had very cordial but tense and real conversations, they've processed, they've been as real as you can be, and I want to thank you all for all of your work.
There's going to be some things that I'm going to point to on the screen, a little bit hard to see from the rear or even in the front of the room for that matter. We made the very thick packet of handouts for your reference, so please take those with you, share them with someone next to you if we've run out. But we'll take questions at the end too, so if you have any, please make sure you remember them for our Q&A session. So I wanted to take us down memory lane a little bit. This is a process, this is the attendance boundary line, something that we check out not just in any one given year, but over multiple years. What you see behind me is a very crude drawing that was sketched in my office way back in this past summer, working with our transportation director and working with our assistant superintendent for business. It is an ongoing, just simple question is, what can we talk about relative to the demographic area? Like, what do we mean when we talk about the northern quadrant of Mendon Center Elementary School? Because it's a very unique thing in our district. We have 5 elementary schools, and for those of you in the audience that don't know, Mendon Center is the only school that splits into 2 different directions. So we wanted to start building quadrants, squares if you will, that we'd be able to have some common language with and talk about some common direction instead of saying, do you know that blinking light on Route 64? And the people, no, I don't know. Well, we got the markers out and we started drawing, and then you'll see some highlighting. I asked a very simple question to our transportation director, could you just kind of point out some easy bus runs we could change? So this is the very first iteration that we showed to the Board of Education way back in October, November, when we started really knowing that we had a problem at Mendon Center based on the superintendent's slides with his challenges. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit in terms of a walk down memory lane and kind of show you the evolution of not only what we've had in central office, but with your feedback on the We're Listening forums and the feedback from the email, phone call, and personal conversations that we've had, and from the committee work, of course, how we started shaping these somewhat neat squares or quadrants into sections or sectors as we started remembering streets and making sure that we included everyone. Got feedback from school board members, some of you saying, you forgot my street, or you forgot to add, or you forgot this and that. Even after being here 21 years, I have not memorized this map, believe it or not. So this started taking shape, and we started numbering things, I would say in an ascending order, so there is a purpose for it. But the 1A, 1B, 2, 3, and 4 were some of the second drafts of us working together behind the scenes to start shaping this so that we can even have just common conversations with one another about what we were talking about and how we could possibly remedy the challenge that the superintendent posed earlier. Before I get into some of the maps that we've done with the committee recently, and you have this in the packet, I completely understand that you won't be able to see this, but there are 26 alternatives that the committee challenged me with. If you think it was a foregone conclusion, I'd love to hear about that, because this was a lot of work, and I accepted the challenge from the committee and our data team as well. And the primary, the thrust of this combination of things is really moving those quadrants or sections to either staying, going to Allen Creek, going to Jefferson Road, and including 4th grade or not including 4th grade, including 5th grade or not including 5th grade with the move. That's the main ingredients in this. That was a little bit challenging because the committee said to me, and the superintendent's cabinet and board said to me, we want to see what happens over the next 5 years. We don't want to just fix the problem at Mendon Center if that's even possible for next year. We want to see a recommendation to the superintendent and to the school board and community that would maybe put us in a good situation for the minimum of 5 years. And so we accepted that challenge as well. And we have literally, with the committee's help, gone house by house, street by street, looking at turnover rates, looking at move-in, move-out rates, and looking at a lot of other data to help inform some of the decisions, recommendations that we're headed towards that you're going to see today here and in your packet. Hard to see, but we have 4 that are shaded in yellow that we're really continuing to process this month of March and into April a little bit. So that continued evolution that I spoke to earlier, now it's not such neat, I guess they were neat, they were market driven, but neater, using some Photoshop, but you can start seeing that we've included all the streets. We made sure we've listened to all the feedback, that no one was forgotten, worked with the town GIS coordinator, and started shaping these quadrants more into sections or sectors to really start talking about how we could look at the Mendon Center, Allen Creek, and Jefferson Road catchment areas over the next 5 years using census data and using trend data. Right now, we wanted to be very direct with you, and I appreciate those who could delay gratification. People wanted to know this earlier, but the committee's like, we really need time to process, and I respected the committee in that. And now it's time for us to tell you that 2B and 4 will be most likely off the table to our recommendation to the superintendent. So folks living in 2B and quadrant 4, section 2B or section 4, we have left that conversation at a committee level for the moment. I want to remind everyone that work we do in Pittsford is committee driven. Committees are advisory, they're feedback loops. My decision, the committee's decision, is not a final decision. The superintendent reports to the school board and there's an ebb and flow with that. I would say that the superintendent and the school board will make the final decision, but this is part of the recommendation so far that we are proposing to them in April. A little more detail. little bit bigger font for those of you that don't have a packet, but we're down to those 4 alternatives. You might say, what does Z, S, P, and Q mean? Is it really an eye chart? We just did it in a descending order because people were upset that we used the sectioning in ascending order. So we started naming the alternatives in a reverse order, and these are the 4 alternatives that either I came up with or the committee came up with to start looking at how we could move neighborhood sections or quadrants as needed to fix Menon Center over the long haul, not the short haul. So diving even a little bit deeper into the quadrants and the sections and the alternatives that we're thinking about, Alternative Z, simply put, and I hope it's simple because there's a lot of detail behind it, takes the 1A at the very tippy top, the northern part of the screen, and sends those 27 kids to Allen Creek next year. It's a recommendation, it's advisory, it's not a determination. I have to say that numerous times because people sometimes don't know how we function in Pittsford, and I just want to repeat myself. We are most likely, with this alternative, if it's picked, would send those kiddos to Allen Creek. And that would change things a little bit, and it would certainly add a section to Allen Creek, filling some existing sectioning space. Then you start getting into if this alternative is chosen by our committee this month. 1B, 3A, and 3B would go to Jefferson Road. In doing so, that would mean 77 students, and I have not memorized this, so if I'm looking at the screen, I apologize. 77 students would go to Jefferson Road, increasing 3 sections immediately starting in September in that school. 2A would stay at Menon Center using Alternative Z. 5th graders, just kind of going from memory, would stay at Menon Center in this alternative, and for that matter, all 4 alternatives that I'm showing you today. Alternative S. Alternative S takes that same 1A section or quadrant, takes them over to Allen Creek, but also includes 1B, 3A, 2A, and 3B, and moves those families and students to Jefferson Road School. The numbers increase a little bit, as you can see, and it obviously discounts 2B and 4, takes them off the table. Folks wanted transparency, and since we're not done with alternatives P and Q, there's really nothing to report that would be fair to the committee, except to say that we are looking at 2 other alternatives that further subdivides Quadrant 1B, and it could send the northern portion of this, call it Alternative P, neighborhoods north of Jefferson Road but south of the canal, to Allen Creek. And it could do the same with Alternative Q. It could send that same neighborhood and the neighborhood south of Jefferson Road to Allen Creek as well. So we are processing those. That's some of the work that we're going to be doing with our committee later this month. So those are the 4 alternatives that we're currently down to in our committee right now in an advisory fashion. I would say there are 2 or 3 questions that are continuously asked by the handful of parents that have reached out to me and or Heather, the superintendent, school board, all of us that are listening. This isn't the number 1 question, but it is a question I wanted to address. I know I made the comment for those of you who attended the public work session a few weeks ago that the alternatives could make a 70-30 split happen at Menon Center, meaning 70% of the students left behind would go to Calkins and, yeah, that's right. So there was a mismatch of a split that people were really concerned that we would be too top heavy in either school. And what I'm saying is that back then, less than 10 years ago, we used to have a 70-30 split going to Calkins, Barker that was disproportionate. I will tell you the good news is that with the alternatives I just showed you, none of the alternatives will get to that 70-30 split that people were concerned about. The alternatives that I just showed you hover around 60-40. It could be closer to 58%, it could be closer to 42%, but it hovers right around that middle range that keeps the school somewhat close, not exactly to 50-50, but it certainly does not bump it up to 70-30 Calkins Barker Road split that some of you were concerned about for friendships and kids staying behind. Right now, in true transparency, the building is closer to 50-50. Those who are here feed into the middle schools in that way, but that has not always been the case, and there's absolutely an ebb and flow, and there has been traditionally as well, as you saw me where I started. Not to go too far, too fast, but we're also still considering 5th graders and their siblings in our alternatives. The question we're pondering at the committee level and seeing if it does the sections is that if 5th graders want to travel with their siblings to either Allen Creek or Jefferson Road, what would that do to sectioning and what would that look like? What would be the permutations of that choice for 5th graders coming up to Mendon Center next year that could be affected by the sections and quadrants I just showed you. So that is more work that the committee is doing this month. So we've done a lot. We've reviewed mapping data to a large extent. For what it's worth, the committee has a binder with well over 100 maps in it. It's not something that we would give out to every community member. Maps that show some personal information that I'm not comfortable sharing with the community at large in terms of which kids live in what house and how many. That's kind of personal stuff we would want to keep private for a whole host of reasons. But the committee has had access to that mapping data. They've had access to the enrollment and projections and sections, which you do have access to on our website and have had for the last 10 to 20 years. We can point to that in the meeting minutes from this if you'd like to explore those projections and sectioning numbers. We've explored in great detail listening to Sean Clark and Mike Biondi, our principals, come in and talk about room counts and facility maps and literally walk us through maps on how the buildings could be reconfigured with input from their teachers and their ILTs, instructional leadership teams. We've looked at staffing implications. We were given a charge by the board and the superintendent not to do staffing per se, but we begged the question and brought in transportation directors and food service directors to make sure if we were doing some of these things, that kids would still be driven to school and that kids would still be fed. So at a light level, we've been making sure that the right people are at the table, the right gatekeepers are at the table to make these decisions and look at the alternatives for proposals. We've studied bus routes, even with the assistant superintendent for business in the room, considering the number of drivers. Every district has a driver shortage right now. We're no different. We're 17 drivers short, all things considered. But keeping that in mind that it's a real issue that all Monroe County schools have, and keeping in mind that we may or may not need buses. We didn't figure we would need buses with these proposals, but the driver shortage and the continued driver shortage was absolutely a pacing factor, as it is with all of our planning. We appraised rollover trends. In simple speak, that's how many people move in and move out of our district. And any given year, at least as of lately, 300 families move in, 300 move out. That's the typical average. And we showed using heat maps to the committee what that looked like. They got a pretty good idea of where our aging out neighborhoods are and where our newer neighborhoods are. We talked about and assessed the concept of incremental kindergarten. That is, if we just had all new kindergartners travel through and go to the new schools as they came up through the system. And that was quickly taken off the table for the sake of logistics. It goes back to the number of drivers and the transportation issues of 6 years that would carry over. Didn't seem like a real feasible option for us as a committee or a district. We evaluated the 26 alternatives that you saw, and then we also looked at the incremental idea of moving just new families into these new schools, into specifically either Jefferson Road or Elm Creek. And that was going to take a number of years, and it would be quickly outpaced based on the space we were going to need at this school. Not enough kids would be moving in is the simple answer. So with that, I'm just going to take a little break and turn it over to Pat Brogan. Dr. Brogan is our Student Services Director, and just have her cover this slide for us.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information around this topic, and I've had the chance to meet with some of the families when they came in to meet with Dr. Cimmerer. One of the important things that we believe in is that taking care of your family through this transition is very important. We've had conversations with some of the families that came in and also on the telephone about some concerns they have if they are moving to the new school. For example, if a student has an IEP, how will that IEP transfer over to the new school? Will the teams be able to talk to each other? Could I have a second IEP meeting if my IEP will be done before the decision is made on the transitions? And I had a chance to talk to Elizabeth Woods today, our Director of Special Education, and she is firmly committed to supporting any of the students that need to move, and the answer to all of those things would be yes. And that's a typical process that we use as well. We've also had questions regarding families whose children are in the English as a New Language program. And Mendon Center here has that program, and Allen Creek has that program, and we can certainly tell you that your children will be well taken care of if they switch from one school to the other. Another question that came up is, and some of you that were at the meeting in the boardroom heard from Mr. Biondi and Mr. Clark about the things that they are planning to do in terms of orientation and tours and events in the new classrooms to the new schools. A question that came up several times was about the YMCA. Some families utilize the YMCA after-school program, so we have been in contact with them, and they are very much a partner with us and are interested in working with us to support transitions to families. Once the board makes a decision, families, if you're moving, families can contact the YMCA and they will work with you around your new arrangements. So some of those other pieces that don't relate to the data and don't relate to the streets that have come up pretty commonly, we'll be able to address in some of these ways. And as Mr. Pero said, we recognize that this can be a challenging time for families. So we do want you to know that we're there to support you, and we have those specialized services ready to go should you need that assistance.
Thank you, Pat. My daughter Kristen, 2 years old, but now she's 21. Kids look up to us, so they kind of watch how we act and how we react to change. Now she's 21 and 6 feet tall. She looks down at me right now, so nice little piece. So next steps is we continue to work, as you saw in some of my earlier slides and the superintendent's slides, and with Pat bringing us up to speed on some of the items here, that we're going to continue to collect data, your data here today. We're going to continue to review feedback from not only this meeting, but any folks that email, call, or meet with us in person. We're going to continue to refine those alternatives that we just spoke of, Z, S, P, and Q, and then hope to offer the recommendation to the superintendent before April 20th, where the board will meet and possibly make a decision on changing the attendance boundary lines for Mendon Center Elementary School.